sorry about the internet dropping out because I'm in Cobham at the moment in a holiday, and yeah, the internet is a bit patchy. But fingers crossed, hopefully we'll be all right. Okay, well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful hearing from the other speakers, and I hope, yeah, this is okay. Yes, so I'm Tracey. I'm 45, and I am, the term that I want to use is hearing impaired. That's my favourite term to explain. Sometimes I say profoundly deaf if they're not really too sure what hearing impaired means, or is it a little bit deaf, or is it major? So yes, it depends on the context and who I am with. But generally speaking, hearing impaired. I'm just thinking about my life and where there's been the example that I could share with you about the theme tonight. I do recall at primary school, so this is going back, more than 35 years ago, I went to a mainstream school, and I was the only student with a hearing loss going to the school. And it became apparent that in my classroom, having the carpet would be a help to me, because obviously you got all these, kids moving around in the classroom and the shared movie, with that great big kind of noise. But for whatever reasons, yeah, the teachers and the Department of Education didn't think it was a good idea. And my parents, they even offered to pay for cupboards. But no, that was all too hard. I think that was just resistant to the shame, the lack of understanding. But my parents, they certainly advocated when too many ISG meetings, integration support group, I think it was called back then. But no, that is for the best. So really, I just had to persevere, basically, and just, with a little bit of luck, I was always placed in the front row. I wanted to be in the front row because obviously I knew from a very young age that Lipreading was my survival key to actually get through. Of course, you always had the problem that, the teachers, the writing on the blackboard, and they're not turning around. See, little things like that. So yeah, primary school was a struggle, a really, really big struggle. Then high school, yeah, came around, and I do recall that the classrooms seemed to have carpet. I'm not too sure why there was a difference with the primary school and high school. But anyway, high school carpets were pretty much all the room, except for maybe science and the cooking. But it wasn't really an issue for me because the students were older. And you didn't have, the great bit of the shares. And so I was able to cope with those wooden floors. It's actually quite interesting about wooden floors. I have wooden floors in my house, and I actually like the look of wooden floors, but it's not an issue for me in my home probably because we're not walking around, you know, in our high heels, clop, 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 you know, we're barefoot and we've got slippers. So I think it's interesting how some, yeah, floors work in some places and they don't. Yeah, so after high school, I became a hairdresser. So again, you can't have carpet on the floor because naturally, you know, cutting the hair, it's not going to fall on the carpet, is it? So, yeah, but it wasn't really that huge problem just because, well, hairdressers wear comfortable shoes. And the shades in the hairdresser channel, they were fixed to the floor. So we didn't really have that great bit. There was a very big access issue in my hairdresser salon. I was not able to, back then, work for someone else. So I'm talking about, 25, more than 25 years ago, in a very small town of Balala, a requirement of being a hairdresser is they do like you to answer the telephone and be by yourself, working late on a Thursday night. Well, that was a barrier for me. Technology regarding, you know, the NRS, the National Relay Service, it wasn't really around. I think it was just kind of rolling out there. So my wonderful mother, who became retired at that age, she worked for me for nothing, mind you, she was my receptionist and answered the telephone. That is the only way I was able to get a job. As a hairdresser back then. So I do reflect on the technology and I think it has improved. I think nowadays, if you want to book in with a hairdresser, you can do an online booking. So the software is a lot more sophisticated. But back in the older days, when I was a hairdresser, you really have to ring up. I did tell my hairdressing client, you don't need to make an appointment. She'd walk up. She'd walk in. So I actually became well known in Balada for she'd walking up without an appointment. So that's an advantage for some people who wanted to have their hair done, you know, on the actual day. So that's my hairdressing. Yeah, from a social point of view, venues do, yeah, they are a very big barrier for me. I am very careful and I'm very selective about where I go. Where I live in Wangaratta is a relatively small town, so I guess you don't really have many options, but I do prefer just to get takeaway and then perhaps go to a park where I've got, you know, the open space and my girls, they can run around. And so, yeah, because like, I think it was Nick, he was saying before, you know, all that echo that you could get from the wooden floors and even the walls. I think the walls are really bad. Like you get that concrete. Yeah, it makes it really, really frustrating. Yeah, I like going to, I've just got my 1 minute mark. Okay, so I'm going okay. I do tend to ramble. Okay. I do like going to, you know, those great big clubs where, you know, you order something at the bar and then you get a kind of like a little machine. And then you take it with you, and then when your order is ready, it flashes a lot. Those great big golf clubs. I do like those because, you know, when they call out the number and you're supposed to collect your order, I'm hopeless at that. So I do tend to go for visual appealing places. See my order, and rather than having to rely on, you know, or the lip reading, because as we all know, lip reading is very tiring. So if there's that visual aspect, it really does help. Going to McDonald's, that is a very good visual pleasure for me, because nowadays, when you go through the drive-through, of course I'm not able to, you know, hear what the boom box is saying to me, right? But I just say my order. And then I get the confirmation on their menu page. So I'm able to double check. Well, so kind of like the access is halfway there. So we're not, I guess we're not quite there yet, because, you know, we don't have, it'd be wonderful to have little video screen where you have somebody doing auctioning. So we're not quite there yet, but at least there is some written confirmation if you're able to read, obviously. So I tend to go to McDonald's more than I go to KFC, because KFC does not have the written board where you're able to confirm your order. So yeah, I just tend to go to places where that are, yeah, accessible. But yeah, being in a small town is probably a little bit more tricky. I don't know what it's like living in Melbourne, where you might have more options. Whether that's harder for you, I'm not too sure. I just have a look at my notes. Bear with me. Yeah, when you go to like a restaurant or somewhere, you know how they have music like playing. Well, obviously I can't hear the music, but the vibration do, you know, make it really tiring. And I often say to people who are hearing, do you like having the music on? And 10 out of 10 times, they'll say, no, we don't like having the music. We can't even hear ourselves talk. So I often have a little bit of a chuckle, because I think, okay, the takeaway for me there is, it's not really a disability access issue. Maybe it's common sense. Then we don't need to have this loud music playing. I've just received the 1 minute to say to wrap up. So I guess the takeaway is that I think access is improving, right? I think we all need to be educated. We all need to tell our story. And who knows what it's going to be like in 20 years' time. And I think that's something to be really hopeful for. Thank you for the opportunity tonight.